Thank you guys so much for joining us for our fourth installation of Passion and Practice. Really excited to have Diana Burnell joining us. We're coming off of 4 days of having Diana at Govs. Last week, I went foraging with the Honors Environmental Science class. We walked around campus and they made their own wild sodas. And then today, went back to class and they got to try their sodas, and Diana had brought some other things for them to try. And it was super fun to see how curious and excited the students were to get into everything that Diana was sharing with them. So really excited to continue that tonight with all of you. Without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce you to Diana Burnell.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm excited to talk to you about foraging today. I did get a few questions prior to the discussion, which I am happy to answer at the end of my foraging presentation. I'm just going to share my screen right now so you guys can check out this video that I made.
Diana, I'm going to interrupt you for a quick second while you're sharing your screen. If as the presentation goes along, there are other questions, please enter them in the Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation as well, but you can throw them in at any point. Thanks.
Hi, guys, and welcome to the fourth installment of Passions in Practice with your host, Diana Burnell, class of 2000. Super excited to have you guys join me today. Today, we're going to be talking about foraging. What is foraging? How you can do it on your own? Wild foods that are available all around us. We'll go on a lovely walk in the woods, identify various trees, plants, and other wild edibles, collect a few things, bring them home, and I'll share 3 recipes with you. All super easy to make by yourself and absolutely delicious. We'll also be gathering a number of wild edibles that probably grow right outside your doorstep. So what is foraging? Well, in its simplest form, it's just the act of going out, identifying wild foods, harvesting them, and you guessed it, eating them. So what do you need to forage? Well, that's one of my favorite parts. You don't need much. In fact, you just need a bag like this one and a trusty field guide to help you identify wild plants and trees. There are plenty of wonderful places to forage, but a few places to avoid. Soccer fields or outdoor playing fields, golf courses, and anywhere that's by the road. Why? Because all of those places will have some sort of pollution. They'll also, a lot of times, be heavily sprayed. So when you're picking wild food for yourself, you want to make sure it isn't contaminated. Some great places to start foraging is by Googling where your local community garden may be. Community gardens will never be sprayed, and their compost piles tend to attract cultivated plants that will then grow wild. It's a perfect place to explore. So today, we're starting in Newton, where I live, right at the community garden. We'll be doing a walk around the woods and gathering. Another plant on our hit list. This is called smooth sumac. Many of you have probably seen this around. You'll tend to find them on field and wood edges, and they're recognizable by these red berries that are at their prime in the fall, but will stick around through the winter time. There's 2 different types of sumac in our area. Smooth sumac, this one is, and you can see based on the berries that they're smooth. The second type is called staghorn sumac. Staghorn has fuzzy red berries on them. Both taste the same, wonderful lemony flavor. The Native Americans would use this, put this in water, and make what's called sumacade. So basically just like a lemonade from this. We're going to be using these today for our wild soda. The best part about wild soda is super easy to make, and all you're looking for is a source of wild yeast. Wild yeast will be on any plant that is outdoors. So we like the flavor of this, and we know it's got yeast on it, so this will work perfectly for a wild soda. A word of caution about sumac. It is related to the cashew family. So if you are allergic to cashew nuts, best to avoid sumac. While we collect ingredients for wild soda is that it's important not to wash or rinse any of the ingredients when you get home because we want that wild yeast on it. So it's even more important that you collect them from a place that isn't polluted. So again, we're well off from the trail and any roads, and we know that this place is not sprayed, so we're good to go. Another fantastic ingredient that's available year-round is pine. All pine, surprisingly, is edible. You can tell the type of pine you have by plucking off a needle and counting the number you have. White pine will have 5 needles, red pine will have 3. White, 5 letters, 5 needles. Easy to remember. Great thing about pine is, depending on the type, it will add a wonderful citrus note to any drink or meal that you may have using this. White pine tastes really nicely of lemon and lime. So when making a wild soda with just white pine, you could basically create your own Sprite. Pine is fantastic, loaded with vitamins, minerals, nutrients that our bodies really crave in the winter. So we'll be making some wild soda and shrub with these white pine needles. For our wild soda recipe, you need to gather about a cup of pine needles for every 2 cups of water you plan to use. We'll also be using this for our shrub recipe, so make sure to gather about a cup and a half of pine. Doesn't matter if it's red, white, doesn't matter if it's spruce, fir, they'll all work just the same. They might just have a slightly different flavor, more grapefruity, orangey, whatever kind you have, it'll be delicious. While it may not be mushroom season right now, there are still some mushrooms that prefer winter temperatures. And this one is a beauty. It's called turkey tail mushroom. And it is technically the most medicinal mushroom on the planet. There are a bunch of studies right now being done that use turkey tail mushroom to combat cancer. Specifically, it fights off tumors. It's an antioxidant, and it's actually pretty easy to ID on your own. First, what you're going to look for is a dead branch, just like this one. Turkey tails like decaying wood and will oftentimes be on decaying branches. It is important to note what tree it came from. Turkey tails will primarily only grow on birch or beech. So here we can tell it's an old birch log. Turkey tail will also feel incredibly velvety on the top and will typically have 3 distinct colors. The colors can be either a brownish gray like this one, a bluish, or green. It will depend mainly on what kind of branch it's growing off of. To further ID it, you want to pluck off a turkey tail and look at the underside. The underside should be white and have tiny little pores. There is another mushroom out here in the winter called false turkey tail. Mushroomers and their naming conventions, but false turkey tail will actually only grow on oak or maple, and if you picked it off, it wouldn't feel velvety at all. It would just feel like a leaf, and it would be completely smooth on the underside, unlike these with the pores. So we know it's still fresh because it's white on the underside. And this mushroom is perfect to make mushroom teas or tinctures. So we'll grab a couple of these, cook them up, and then throw them in with the wild soda just to get all the medicinal benefits. Why not? Now you may have noticed while we're walking around that there's snow on the ground. And that's because, full disclosure, we're out here the first week of February foraging. Foraging has micro seasons. We're not talking about just 4 seasons. In foraging, there are basically 12 to 16 seasons. Some wild foods are available year-round. That's why we're out here today, to show you that many, many foods are still available in the dead of winter. In fact, some are at their prime. Right here, we have a shagbark hickory tree. Shagbark hickories make fantastic syrup. You can think of it like a maple syrup, except it's going to be smoky. The best part is we don't have to tap the tree. We don't have to do all that work. We don't have to wait 2 weeks and then boil it down, boil it down. We actually just have to collect the bark. It's easy to identify because, like the name states, it's really shaggy. You can see the bark coming off of the tree already. What you're looking for are just a few pieces of loose bark as to not damage the tree. So I'll just go around and see which ones are loose. All you need to make about 24 ounces are about 5 pieces of shagbark. The other way to identify it is to look on the ground and look for the old hickory nuts, which you can see right here. The trees will drop these wonderful nuts and you can eat them as well. Another thing to do is, if you didn't want to get the bark, you could also make the syrup just from the husks. While some of the bark will be on the ground, we don't want to get that. We don't know if any dogs have been by, any pollution from the road. We're going to let that hang out and continue decomposing and rebuilding the forest. That's all we need. Pretty easy, huh? Winter and spring are actually a great time to forage. And a lot of the foraging that you'll be doing is going to be very closely informed by what type of environment you are in. You can see here we have some fresh standing water, and it's loaded right now with cattails. Cattails are a staple of the wild food scene. Basically, the entire plant is edible. Another plant that really likes to be next to water or in the hedgerows are wild grapes. And we actually have a ton of wild grapes all around us. We mainly have 2 different kinds. One that's similar to a Concord grape that'll look just like your normal, regular store-bought grapes. And another kind called a fox grape or frost grape, which are a little bit smaller, and they don't get super sweet until, like the name says, after a frost. As you can see here, this is a whole giant stand of wild grapes. You can see here that the trunk is going to look a little bit slightly reddish. It's going to be a little papery. And really what you're looking for are these old tendrils. So that's another way to help you ID it. Grapes start coming out in May. The leaves will start coming out, and you can use grape leaves just like you would store-bought grape leaves. They're great for stuffing, rice and meat in. They're also just kind of great sprinkled over salad. The tendrils taste very similar to the grape type, so you can know the grape type by chewing on a tendril when they're young and green. And then the grapes themselves tend to come out in August and September. Last year was an excellent grape year, and very oftentimes you'll actually smell the grapes before you see the vine. Here we have one of my favorite trees to forage in the early spring. You can see right here, this is a great way to start identifying it. It's a birch tree, and all birches will have these little catkins on the end of them. The catkins in April and May will start to open up and then distribute pollen. But right now they're closed, and they're a great way to identify any kind of birch. This specific birch is what we're looking for. It's called a black birch. Black birch and sweet birch or yellow river birch all do the same things. And what we're looking for foraging is basically just to pick off just the tips of some of the branches. The great thing about these little branches is that they taste exactly like winter fresh gum. They make great teas, they make great syrups, and they're perfect for the drinks that we'll be making later today. You don't need to gather a lot of them. Basically, I would say probably a good handful will be the perfect amount to give you a lovely tea, soda, or syrup. And you're not injuring the tree at all by taking these branches. You're doing it in a super responsible, sustainable way. And that's a really important thing with foraging. Because everything grows wild and you want to keep coming back to harvest it throughout the years, The general rule for foraging is anything that you find, you should really take only 1/3 of. Why 1/3? Well, that's going to help continue the growth. It will help the seeds continue on and keep spreading. It will also help so that if another forager finds it, they can also harvest from it as well. But anytime I go out, I always say only take 1/3 of what you find. So I will say probably the easiest way to tell if it's a sweet birch or a black birch is really to take one of these little twigs, stick it in your mouth, and chew on it a little bit. You can also strip a little bit of the bark with your thumb and take a big whiff. It should smell minty. If it doesn't smell minty, it's probably one of the 20 other types of birch that grow around here. The other way to ID it, though, is by looking closer at its bark. Follow me. The birch is one of the easier trees to identify based on its bark. You're going to look for a pattern that is always lateral. You can see these very defined lateral lines throughout the bark. And when you think about if the bark's stripped, it's always going to kind of strip in that lateral motion, side to side. It's a black birch because as far as birch go, it's one of the darkest barks you will see. You typically think of white, you think of yellow. Those are much lighter in color and shinier. This one has some very dark color to it. So black birch here, you'll find them very oftentimes on field edges. Again, they do like water, but it's not necessary for them to be only around water. And typically they will be about this size. There aren't a ton that are super, super large. They're mainly, I'd say under 100 years old. This one's probably about 30 years old. So with the leaves down, it's a great time to identify trees. Trees are actually fairly simple to identify. I bet you know a bunch that you didn't even know you knew. Oaks are really easy to identify because they're going to be basically some of the only trees that will still have leftover leaves from last year. So here you can see this is a nice white oak. And then right in front of it, right here, you can see these red buds. The red buds and the fuzzy end here means that it's a maple tree. So sugar maples right now are being tapped all across New England for their delicious maple syrup. That tends to happen the end of February, early March, when the trees are just starting to come out of their dormancy and the sap comes up from the ground as the tree's energy, and then you tap it and can get delicious syrup. So the one most important tip I can give you about foraging is to let your own natural curiosity guide you. There are so many different avenues you can take this new hobby, from medicinal to edible to exercise, and just generally observing and feeling closer to nature. There's so many wonderful, wonderful gifts that you will receive once you start your journey of foraging. Well, we're back in my kitchen after a wonderful morning foraging, and I'm going to show you guys 3 super simple recipes to enjoy the foraged ingredients that we just got. Again, we don't need a ton of stuff to make really, really delicious things. And you can see here we got our pine needles, we got our black birch bark and tips, and then we have our shagbark hickory bark, which we're going to make a syrup from. So we're going to start with the syrup recipe. It's super simple, but it does take the longest. And all you need for this is some shagbark bark and some sugar. Just simple white granulated sugar works very, very well. So to start, all we're going to do is basically take a potato scrubber. You can also use a new toothbrush if you have one. Any type of brush will work well. And we're just going to kind of start to delicately brush off any dirt any bugs that might be in there. Sometimes they're little spider webs. We're just gonna try to get it as clean as we possibly can. You don't have to spend a ton of time doing this, but you want to make it as clean as possible. Like that. Oftentimes you'll find little kind of sand granules in between the bark, so that works. And then I'm going to just kind of break it down a little bit more so it fits into a nice warm pot of water, and we'll let it soak for about 15 to 20 minutes. After it soaks, we'll get out some paper towels, dry it off, and then we'll throw it into a 400-degree oven for about 15 to 20 minutes until the bark is nice and roasted. There we go. There. And even with this small amount of bark, I would imagine this is going to make about 2 to 3 cups of syrup, which is a heck of a lot more than you would get if it was maple syrup. You'd have to probably forage, at least 2 gallons of sap to make a maple syrup. So it's just nice, easy, quick. And the main difference between the flavors is that it tastes very similar to syrup, maple syrup, but because we're roasting it, you get this really beautiful kind of layer of smokiness that pairs very well with many, many cocktail drinks. I like it with bourbon and rye drinks. You can make paper airplanes or do a little take on an old fashioned. But it's also great to enjoy with your kids over some pancakes or basically any other normal way you would use maple syrup. Get the oven going, and again, we're gonna set it to 400 degrees and roast for about 15 or 20 minutes. So we just took the shagbark out of its warm water bath, and I'm just double checking the bark to make sure it got all clean in there. If you see kind of any little green mossy pieces or anything like that, feel free to just go back with the brush and remove them. I'm apparently out of paper towels, so I've had to use napkins, but I'm just blotting them dry. And we're just going to take a roasting pan and throw them right in here in these little chunks. I'm ready for the 400-degree oven. And then follow me to my oven. So we got the 400-degree oven. I'm going to throw those in for about 15-20 minutes. Basically, once you start smelling them, in there you'll start to smell this really sweet, nice hickory smell. Once you start smelling them, I'd encourage you to turn the oven off and take them out because we definitely don't want to burn the wood. While that's roasting, I'm just going to fill up this pot of water and set it to boil. I'm going to start with about 5 cups of water. And actually, let me be a little bit more precise. Let me actually measure this water. Let's see. So typically I like to start with about 5 cups because you are going to boil it down to about half that amount. So the amount you start with will be twice as much as what you end up with. So we'll get that starting to boil while we wait for the bark to roast. So we now have the shagbark hickory bark out of the oven. It's been in there for 15 or 20 minutes at 400. The great thing also about wild foods is the nutritional value. So for shagbark hickory, it's really loaded with magnesium and potassium, which are great because in the winter our bodies really crave those two things. And that's the nice thing about gathering it. That's why I typically like to gather it in the winter time. So just take the little chips and kind of break them up so they fit into your boiling water. Again, I started with about 5 cups of water. We will let the bark simmer. So I'll reduce the heat a bit and we'll let it simmer for about 25 or 30 minutes. And all that's doing is basically creating a nice tea. If you think of it like that, you're just kind of creating a nice tea. And after that, we'll take the bark out and then we'll add equal parts sugar. And if you wanted to get really crazy and experimental with it, you could certainly also add a few sprigs of the birch tips. That'll add kind of a nice, I would liken it to a minty flavor. Other people just say it tastes like birch bark beer. Gosh, birch bark beer. Say that 3 times fast. So totally up to you. And that's the really cool thing about working with wild foods is kind of like what's preferred by your palate and just kind of what do you want to experiment with. So I'm going to reduce this now. You can see it's really starting to bubble. And we just want it to simmer, and it's going to turn into this gorgeous kind of ambery color. So we'll let that go. And again, it's kind of infusing that smokiness. Hickory is the wood that's used most often for smoking bacon. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with that flavor already. And while we're waiting, maybe I'll talk to you a little bit about how I got into foraging. It was pretty much by lucky coincidence that I found foraging. I grew up in seacoast of New Hampshire, and as a little kid, I was big into nature and the outdoors. My parents were very encouraging of us not watching the television and instead going outside to play. So I grew up right on the beach. And interestingly, one of my favorite games to play with my mom and my sister growing up was a game that we called Transcendentalists. So we would all pick to be either Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, or Louisa May Alcott. We would go out into the backwoods and pretend like we were fishing and gathering food and discussing the happenings of Concord, Massachusetts back in the day. But I think a lot of that really led me to enjoying kind of the great nature writers of the 17 and 1800s. And from there, I went on to Berwick Academy in Maine, where I was a student until sophomore year of high school. I transferred to Governors, where I was going to be able to finally be able to do track and field, where I was a thrower, which I had a blast. And I did carry that on to college, where I went to Wheaton College and was a member of 4 NCAA Division III championship teams as a thrower. But the second reason I went to Governors was because I did have some learning disabilities. And so I was able to spend a lot more time kind of in the classroom with my teachers, studying and having kind of direct interaction with them, more than your average school. But I had a wonderful time there, and Governors ended up giving me my first real passion in my professional life, which was music production. So as many of you may remember, in 99 and 2000, Governor had set up a pretty awesome music production trailer that sat feet away from Pierce Dorm, where I lived senior year. So I got really into music production there and ended up going to Wheaton for writing and for sports, but I went to graduate school at Emerson College, where I focused on audio production. And then after that, I moved to LA and worked in the entertainment business for about 9 years. Not sure for that. I worked in entertainment for about 9 years and did all sorts of stuff, all sorts of sound design for movies, Foley art. I did music recording and engineering for a wide variety of musical acts. A few you may have heard of. One was Tatiana Ali from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Another was probably who your parents have heard of, Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I had a fantastic time in LA. I made a lot of great friends. But that was where I first started to get interested in foraging. I was walking around the streets of LA and just was constantly seeing so many fruit trees all up and down. Beautiful pomegranates, loquats, orange, lemon, lime trees that were planted all up and down the city streets, and no one seemed to be picking them, which I thought was weird. Anyways, when I got back, I decided to move back in 2013 to New England, and I knew that switching careers was going to be a bit of a challenge, a bit of a lifestyle change. So I said, I better have a pretty interesting hobby to get into. And I had always loved fishing. And so when I started thinking about hobbies, I just knew that I wanted to be outdoors. I knew that I wanted to learn things on my own. And I just kind of started thinking, boy, I don't know anything about trees. I know nothing about the trees around me. So I bought a book just about trees. That's just how it started. And I started going around to my backwoods and just starting to identify stuff on my own and kind of learn the different terms. And from there, the next book that was recommended was something called Foraging, which I had never heard of in 2013. And I thought, wait a minute, if I could walk around, be outside in nature, connect with the things that are around me, and snack, that sounds like the greatest hobby ever. So I got all the books I could, and I just started going out basically any spare time that I had and teaching myself. And it's amazing kind of the different paths that I've taken to get where I am. If you had asked me 12 years ago that I'd be doing this professionally, I would have thought you were insane. But throughout the course, it's just seemed to, just different opportunities have seemed to present themselves to me. And when any opportunity presents itself, I always say yes. So 4 or 5 years into my foraging, I started having restaurants reach out, asking me to send them or sell them different produce or mushrooms. And that's how the business started. And then 3 or 4 years after that, I had a lot of people starting to ask if I would take them out for classes. And so that's how I further expanded. And even more exciting, new news just between you and me. The latest chapter in this foraging tale is that last week I signed my very first publishing contract. So there will be a new foraging book out, written by yours truly in April of 2017. Anyways, back to the recipes. So the syrup has just finished boiling off, and all I'm going to do is simply bottle it. Easy peasy. And like I said, it's really, really nice. You can use it just as you would a maple syrup, or you can use it in delicious cocktail mixes. Works really well with rye and bourbon and whiskey. Adds a nice smoky sweet flavor. And this syrup will stay good for up to a year, stored properly in your cabinet. Just keep it out of the sun. Okay, so our next recipe is a wild soda, and wild sodas are just one of my very favorite things to make. They are super easy. If you have kids, this is a great way to get them into foraging. And again, you don't need much at all. All we're going to use for this recipe is some Poland spring water and a little bit more sugar. So with the pine needles that we've gathered, all I've done is just kind of chop them up a bit. You don't have to chop them up. It's just a way of getting more flavor out of them. I like to use a plastic bottle for this to start. That's basically because plastic, if you are kind of experimenting and this is your first time making a soda or anything carbonated, it's always good to start with plastic first, just because if you happen to miss a day or two of shaking it and burping it or releasing the gases, this won't explode, whereas glass might. So we're going to take the pine needles. Again, they haven't been rinsed. That's because we want all of the wild yeast that's on there. And we're just going to jam them in the bottle. I'd say it's about a cup of pine needle. If you were able to forage some sumac, throw in just a whole head of that sumac right into your bottle. As well, that has a ton of wild yeast and tastes really nice and lemony. But for this one, we got the pine needles, and then we'll use the birch bark. And for the birch bark, all you're going to do, if you have catkins on the end of them, just kind of snip them off with your thumb, and then using your knife, you're just kind of going to gently grate them a bit. And that's basically just to start getting the oils out. Once you do this, you'll notice you can smell it a lot more. And that's just, again, making the oils activated. And you don't have to put a ton into it. But again, this will have yeast as well, so we didn't wash them. So I'll just put in, probably about 5 or 6 of these in there. And then the only other thing you need to remember is that for every cup of water that you use, you want to use at least 1 tablespoon's worth of sugar. You can use more if you like a more sugary soda. You're absolutely welcome to use more. It might carbonate faster if you do, but for the sugar and the yeast to interact and create carbonation, you need at least 1 tablespoon. So this is all loaded up with our ingredients. I'll put the water in here. So you'll fill it not completely to the top. We want to leave some space. Get my sugar out here. And I know that this holds approximately 4 cups of water. So we want to do at least 1/4 cup of sugar. And nothing has to be exactly measured. There you go. And then all you need to do is cover it up, and once a day, you're going to come in and basically gently shake it. And then what we call burp it, which just means to open it and have the gases release. You'll do that for about 7 days, and you'll stop once it's fully carbonated. So of course I have already pre-made some sodas just so you guys can see the difference. This is now a 3-day-old soda, and you can see that it's starting to ferment nicely with all of the same ingredients in here. You can see the bubbling starting to come out, and you can hear, see, starting to carbonate right here. So that's after 3 or 4 days, and if you like the way that looks, feel free to start drinking it. This one, I've let go for quite some time. I've let it go now for about 2 weeks, and you can see once it starts the fermentation process, your liquid will start to turn cloudy. That's totally normal. Doesn't mean it went bad. But here's one after 2 weeks, and you can see just how carbonated it's gotten. So I typically recommend about 7 days, depending on how warm it is outside. So in order to enjoy it, all you would do is just strain it and then serve it just like you would a soda. I love to make cocktails out of it. It's really great with vodka and gin drinks. It's very aromatic and has lots of nice citrusy notes from the pine and the sumac and the birch. Done. Super easy. So the last recipe we have for you today is called a shrub. A shrub is basically just a drinking vinegar, and it got really popular during quarantine when everyone was kind of making their own cocktails at home. But it has been around for hundreds of years in a variety of cultures. And it's just basically another way of preserving fresh fruit. You can use any kind of fruit that's in your fridge. The only fruit I would recommend kind of staying away from is citrus fruit, since we're going to be combining it with apple cider vinegar, which is already fairly tart and acidic. So today I just have 3 plums that were on sale at the grocery store. I have 1 piece of our shagbark hickory. I have some white pine needles and some birch bark. And all I'm going to do is just chop these up. And like I said, many cultures for centuries have been making shrub drinks that are great for your gut health. They're another way of preserving fruit, and you can get really funky with the combinations. You can use it just as, like I said, just as a drinking vinegar, have a shot of it to start your day, or you can use it for cocktails. It's really good mixed in with vodka drinks. And you can totally vary the type of vinegar that you're using. Basically, my rule is if it's a light colored fruit on the inside, like peach, nectarines, strawberries, I like to use apple cider vinegar for those. But if it's a purple fruit, grape, blueberry, that type, then I use a red wine vinegar. You could also use champagne vinegar, sherry vinegar. It's kind of what your preference is and where your taste buds lie. So we'll just kind of chop these up. We want to chop them up pretty finely, just because we're trying to get all that nice juice out of them. Just throw them into this little container here. We'll take our piece of shagbark and kind of break it up a little bit more, and that'll just add a nice smoky layer. We'll chop up these pine needles a little bit. You don't have to have a ton, but it's going to add a nice citrusy flavor and a lot of nice vitamin A and C. And then, just a few sprigs of this birch bark. Why not? Why not? We have it here. We may as well throw it in. So that's the basic mix. And all you're going to do is cover it with sugar. You're going to mix it nicely and set it in the fridge for 24 hours. And it's basically going to create a really nice syrup with all these wonderful flavors. So I'll stick this in the fridge. And then, of course, like any true cooking show, I have one here that's ready, that's been sitting in the fridge for 24 hours. So you can see how syrupy it's gotten. All right? So, all we're gonna do now is take this mix. I like to use a mason jar for it because it's also gonna help me measure how much of a mix there is from this ingredient. And this is called a cold infusion. You can do hot infusions with shrubs as well. Certain shrubs will require it. If you're using anything with elderberry, let's say, elderberries have to be cooked first. So that you would do a hot infusion with hot water. But I like to do cold infusions, especially when I'm adding any greens to them, like pine, because when you heat up pine, it really does change the flavor profile. So we can see here that we have, just about a cup and a half of just the syrup. So all we're going to do is take our apple cider vinegar and we're going to add equal parts. Just like that. Now what I like to do is shake it up so that all the sugar and the vinegar mixes together. And then what I like to do is leave this out on top of the counter for 2 days. Once a day, I'm gonna shake it and burp it. And then after 2 days, it's gonna be fully infused, and all you would do is simply strain it, strain out the pine needles, the plum, and any other herbs that you may have and want to use that are just at your house. Basil's great, rosemary's great, lavender's great. They'll all work. You just strain it out and then bottle it up. Make sure you store this in the fridge though. So that way you basically stop any further fermentation, and it will be shelf stable in the fridge for up to 4 months. So it's a great, great way of preserving your fruit and your wild food ingredients into a delicious and healthy drink. For more foraging tips and tricks, follow me on social media at edible.excursions, or sign up for a foraging class by visiting my website, edibleexcursionsforaging.com. Want to learn more about foraging? Join me for a campus forage at Governor's Academy during reunion weekend on June 7th.
Diana, that was so much fun. Thank you for putting that video together and the tips. The shag bark syrup was a huge favorite of the students this week when Diana shared it. We do have some questions that I'd love to get to. One is, I know we have a couple of younger viewers, some kids of some faculty members and some alumni that are watching. And one is wondering, what are some good things to forage now? Like if you're going out in May in Massachusetts or New Hampshire, what could you be looking for?
Fantastic question, and I appreciate my young viewer Ryder asking me that, who has been on some forages with me. And I think he knows some answers to this. May, stinging nettles, which he's a particular fan of. Stinging nettles will be up. We got spruce tips coming out. We got lilacs. We got dandelions. We got morels. Many, many wonderful things. Mugwort, mullein, so many wonderful herbs to enjoy. May is a great time to get on out there. Thanks for your question, Ryder. Go to bed.
So we have another question about yeast in the natural soda. So can you briefly explain why or how the wild yeast is a necessary component for making natural sodas? For example, how is it different, say, from an example of making like beers or wine?
Yes, Cortland. Cortland had some great questions. So it's not different. It's just basically what you're doing is with the beer, you're using the hops. Hops has wild yeast on it. For wine, you're using grapes, depending on the kind. A lot of them you have to use organically. Otherwise, you're actually adding commercial yeast. And commercial yeast is basically the exact same as wild yeast. It's just a product that you can buy easily. But with ours, we're gathering wild yeast. Wild yeast grows on all wild plants that are outdoors. So that's why when you combine wild yeast with edible plants, you can really do some amazing things. The same soda recipes that we talked about, if you altered them ever so slightly, you could make beer and or wine with them. So great question.
Is there an easy way to clean lion's mane mushrooms?
Yes, there is. So I believe it was twofold, lion's mane and coral mushrooms specifically. I believe perhaps maybe more specifically cauliflower mushrooms. Cauliflower mushrooms are one of the only cauliflower and chanterelles are one of the only kinds that I'm going to say are actually okay to wash. You do need to wash them. You're going to really soak them and then put them in a ton of paper towels and try to get all that moisture out. But that's really the only way you can get them out of all the kind of ridges and gills. Otherwise, for lion's mane, I don't like to do that because they already are so water soaked. I recommend using a kid's soft toothbrush. That's the only way you're really going to get into all the nooks and crannies. Wait, I can't hear you, Miss Boulay.
Because I muted. So one of our people watching foraged morels when they lived in Wyoming, and curious if there's any place to find them in New Hampshire and Massachusetts.
Mhm. And here's what I say. You know, if you forage morels in Wyoming, that those spots are secret. And I'm probably not going to tell you where you can actually get morels in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, but I appreciate the try. However, this is what I'll recommend. It's always great to start in your local town forest or community garden. I will say New Hampshire and Massachusetts both have pretty strict rules that you cannot take anything from state parks, so avoid state parks. Otherwise, I would recommend making friends with private landowners. Thanks.
Someone is wondering if you've ever made linden tea.
Linden tea is fantastic. The linden tree grows all over my neighborhood. I love it. It is really aromatic. I make teas with it. I make sodas with it. I make syrups with it. I make jellies with it. You can do all sorts of different things with any flower that is edible that you think really smells good. I urge you to try to make your own jelly with it because it really takes it to a new level. We all had magnolia jelly this week with the kids on campus because there's so many magnolia trees, and I think they were pretty surprised at the flavor profiles that you can create with a simple flower.
So, just segueing into that, there was actually a question about how to make lilac jelly. I'm assuming all of these linden, lilac, magnolia,
All
they're
the same.
going to fall into the same. Yeah. So, give
All
us
the same.
a little quick tutorial on that.
Sure. It's actually really similar to the shagbark syrup. The only difference is, so again, you're going to boil water. You're going to steep for a while with the flowers. The only difference with the jelly versus the syrup is that you're going to add pectin. That's it. The only difference. All of my recipes are available, like I said, on my blog, on my website. So feel free to look them up. There's plenty of things to explore and discover.
A couple of questions about plants with medicinal properties, sort of a general question, but then specifically someone was wondering if there might be any on Gov's campus.
Oh my goodness. I would say about half of my foraging is for medicinal plants. And even that mainly also has to do with the fact that so many edible plants also have medicinal qualities. We found a load on Gov's campus. We found mullein, we found mugwort, of course, we found black birch, which has a lot of medicinal qualities. We found elder, slippery elm. Slippery elm I know also has a lot of medicinal qualities. We found willow bark, of course, aspirin. So there's plenty of stuff. I know St. John's wort was starting to come up. So really, basically, if you open your door, I guarantee there will be medicinal plants within at least 100 yards of it.
The students like the mullein. I mean, that you should, that was like one of the first things they got, like really got hands-on and rubbing the aloe-like quality on each other is really what it is. But that was sort of fun for them. Um, do you have any tips for chanterelles?
Um, Basically, same thing. Kids' toothbrush is what I would recommend cleaning wise. Otherwise, if you're looking for them, always start with the coniferous trees, so pines, spruce. They tend to like those types of places. Governors, of course, has a lot of pine on campus, so I would think that'd be a pretty good spot. But otherwise, that you're looking for mainly pine forests.
All right, last question. In your foraging around Govs, you were here in the fall a little bit, and then obviously with the classes for the last week. Anything that surprised you?
Uh, I mean, I'm always surprised just by the amount of edibles on campus or anywhere. I mean, in the short kind of 2 weeks in the fall and this spring that I was there, I would say we identified probably at least over 60 different um, trees, plants, fungi with medicinal, edible, medicinal properties. So, I mean, it's pretty cool.
It was really cool. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been
Um, Diana, thank you for spending so much time with us tonight, spending so much time with us during this year, and really excited for another Forge over reunion weekend. So I think it's going to be at about 1:30. It's on Saturday. Anyone's welcome to join, whether it's a reunion year or not. So please feel free to come to campus, enjoy some lunch. Athletic Hall of Fame, lots of great stuff that happens that day, including this. So we'd love to see you. Next month is our next passion and practice is Abby Katz. Abby does a lot of is at Brown University. She's getting her PhD and she studies food advertising. So she's going to join us and talk a little bit about her studies and what she's found and probably some things that she's worked on since I last talked to her that she'll sort of explore. So that will be May 14th, Wednesday evening. So please join us for that if you can. In the meantime, cheers. Diana made me some wild soda.
Cheers, guys.
Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.